Hey guys, welcome to episode 5 of the weekly update, the series where I talk about my experiences with pickleball paddles I've hit throughout the week. Now, this week was a bit of a short one because I did spend half of it in Disney World, so instead of hitting any new paddles this week, I decided to do a comparison on two paddle series I've hit before, the Saga series from Vatic Pro and the 11Six24 All Courts. The reason I chose these two is because they're both similar in their construction. They both use that Gen 1.5 construction with some slight modifications, and they also both come in multiple shape options. So let's get into it. Let's start first by talking about the feel of both of these paddles. So neither paddle is thermoformed, so they're not in that hot mold for extended periods of time. And because of that, they have more of a Gen 1.5 construction, so they're not as stiff feeling as a Gen 2 paddle. So the Saga series, in comparison to Vatic's original Gen 1.5 line, the Prisms, these have a bit more of heat involved when they're being created, and the surface isn't pure carbon fiber, but it's instead a composite blend. Vatic hasn't really disclosed what that blend is or exactly how the construction is, but I'm pretty sure for the base surface, it's probably just a blend of carbon fiber and fiberglass. Now, compared to their softer Prism line, this does hit noticeably harder, and it doesn't have as soft of a feel off the face. And there's also a little bit less dwell time compared to the Prisms, but it's noticeably better compared to a Gen 2 paddle or even a Gen 3 paddle. So you get more of a plush feel off the face, just not as much as the Prism series. It's just like a little bit of a step above. In comparison, the All Courts, these actually feel softer off the face. So these have 3 layers. There's 2 layers of fiberglass at the top, and then they have the fiberglass closest to the core as the 3rd layer. So I think the first 2 carbon fiber layers are very soft and plush feeling. So when you're hitting your shots, you really feel that soft feel that's more reminiscent of a Gen 1.5, like the Jelly Bean series. But I do think that the fiberglass does cause the ball to shoot off a lot faster, and there's less dwell time on the All Courts compared to the Sagas. You do get a bit more pop with these because of that fiberglass layer at the near the core, versus on the Sagas, you get a bit more dwell time on these, and I do think you kind of feel the shots a bit more. So you get a bit more plow through when you're hitting, and you just really feel the shots more on your drops and things because you get that extra dwell time. Versus on these All Courts, it's just, you get a soft initial feel, but then the ball will shoot off faster. I actually did bring in the course shapeshifter line because that does have a similar layup, so it does have like 2 soft layers of carbon fiber and also fiberglass at the bottom, but that one is a Gen 2 paddle versus this is a Gen 1.5 paddle. With the shapeshifters, I do think that the differences between the first 2 layers and the 3rd layer is a lot smaller compared to the All Courts. The All Courts, you do really feel that soft first 2 layers of carbon fiber, and then that last layer of fiberglass, I won't call it harsh, but it's just very noticeable compared to those first 2 layers. Well, it's more of a subtle change in the shapeshifter itself. But yeah, in terms of feel overall, like these are softer feeling, but there's less dwell time on them versus the Sagas. You get a bit more feel, a bit more plow through on them. All right, now before we go into any more metrics, I did want to talk about the shape options that both companies offer. So both of them do come in the 3 big shapes. Starting off with the Sagas, they have the Bloom, which is their standard shape paddle. This is 16 by 8, has that rounded top. And for the handle, I want to say it's about 5.6 inches off the top of my head. But for the swing weight on this, we had 112, which is pretty high actually for a standard shape paddle. And the twist weight, we got 7.05, which is about average. And meanwhile, for the Pegasus shape, this is the wide body from 11Six24. It's slightly shorter than the Bloom. I think it's maybe like 15.8 around there. Sorry, you can't really see that. There we go. It's slightly shorter. The handle, if we look at it side by side, is about the same, but there is a bit of a sharper taper on the Bloom compared to the Pegasus. For the Pegasus All Court, though, surprisingly, the swing weight was pretty high. It's actually 116, and that's more than the Pegasus swing weights for the other paddles that 11Six24 has, like their Power and their Jelly Beans. But 116 is very high for a standard shape paddle. This is actually approaching the territory of like the mid-range for hybrid paddles. But for the twist weight, we got 7.40, which is good. But overall, like both of these do kind of have like that higher swing weight, which is kind of surprising, especially this one. Now, moving on, let's go into their hybrid paddles. So I only have the long handle flash on me right now. I want to say this is actually 16.4. It's slightly longer than their short handle, and the handle I believe is in that 5.7. I think somewhere between 5.7 and 5.75 is around there. But this is their hybrid shaped paddle. This one has a long handle. They both have a curved top, and they taper at the top two corners and come down. For the swing weights, we got 120 for the long handle and 114 for the short handle. So this one has a higher swing weight, which makes sense because it's also longer overall. And then for the twist weight, we got 6.30 for this one and 6.45 for the short handle. Meanwhile, for 11Six24, they have their new shape, the Vapor. So this one is a bit flatter at the top, as you can see. It still tapers down here, but the length overall is shorter on this compared to the other two. So this one is barely 16.2 in its length, but I think it might be a little bit wider. But at least on the long handle for the flash, you do get more of that taper here, while there's a wider taper on the Vapor shape. So what's surprising about the Vapor was how heavy this one was, and it was actually the heaviest out of all the 11Six24 paddles I have. The Vapor all court is 119 for swing weight, and for the twist weight with 6.95. 119, that's in that elongated paddle territory. And even though the flash long handle is 120, which is also in that elongated paddle territory, it's also 16.4, and then this is a 16.2. So this being at that 119 is actually very surprising. Anyways, let's move on to the elongated paddles. This time I have both of these 7s. So there's a short handle, which is like a 5.3-inch handle. Long handle one, I want to say it's also like that 5.7. Both are the same shape, unlike the flashes. So they're both 16.5 by 7.5. For the swing weight of the long handle, we got 125, twist weight 6.50. And then for the short handle, we had 120, twist weight 6.62. Now in comparison, 11Six24 has a Hirachi shape. This is actually my jelly bean, so I'm just holding this as a frame of reference, but my Hirachi all court right now is being demoed. So if we look side by side, the handle on the Hirachi is actually longer than both of the handles we have on the flashes. In terms of its length and width, those are about the same. It mainly just has that longer handle, and it has the curved top for the head. For the swing weight on this, we got 117, and then twist weight, which is 6.30. So surprisingly lower numbers compared to the hybrid shape Vapor that they have. All right, so now that we've taken a look at the models and their numbers, let's talk a bit more about them. For the Saga series, I think for the most part, most of these numbers are kind of in line with what we're seeing with each of these shapes for the swing weights and twist weights. I will say the bloom is slightly a bit higher than I would have expected it to be. And the one paddle for like the swing weight that kind of stood out more is the long handle flash, but that's also just like a completely different mold than the short handle. So while most hybrid paddles are in that 16.25 range for length, this one's 16.4. So it's a bit closer to an elongated paddle, which kind of makes sense why the swing weight is higher. Twist weights, they're about normal as well. I will say it is a bit interesting how like normally you would see like hybrid paddles have higher twist weights, but it's usually the opposite with these Vatic paddles. As for the all courts, I think this is the one where the numbers kind of stand out a bit more, specifically on the Pegasus and the Vapor. So the Pegasus being at 116 for swing weight, that is very high. That is approaching the hybrid paddle swing weight, like I said before. And then the Vapor being at 119, even though the length is like around 16.2, that's also, that stands out a lot. And the Hirachi, you would expect the elongated paddle to have the lowest swing weight, but for some reason, its swing weight is actually very similar to the Pegasus. So the swing weights here are kind of weird. Yeah, it's just surprising how like light the Hirachi felt, but then the Pegasus and the Vapor, like they're shorter shapes. You expect them to have, like they do have higher twist weights, but you expect them to have that lower swing weight as well. But For some reason, I'm not sure what like if it's how they're made or even if it's just the paddles that I have because I only have one of each. But at least for these paddles, like it's just really interesting how high the Vapors and the Pegasus are in comparison to like the other paddles that we've been testing. All right, now let's move on to the overall power and pop of these paddles. So I did touch upon the pop briefly, but I do think that the fiberglass layer on the all quartz gives it more pop compared to the Sagas. You do get that less dwell time, and the ball does shoot off faster compared to the Saga paddle. So for overall pop, this is going to the all quartz. But power is where things get a bit interesting. I think here's where I would put the ranking. So the V7 long handle I put as the most powerful. Number two, I would say the V7 short handle. Now, number three is going to be the Vapor All Quart. And then number four is going to be the Saga Flash long handle. Number five would be the Saga Flash short handle. Six would be the Hirachi All Quart. Seven would be the Saga Bloom. And eight would be the Pegasus All Quart. Overall, I think the Saga series, because you get that more plow through off your shots and the way it feels, you are getting more overall power on those compared to the All Quarts. With the all quartz, like I said, they have that like sort of Gen 1 feel to them because of how plush it is. But then when that fiberglass layer activates, what it does is the ball does shoot off fast, but like when you're hitting drives, it does have the feeling of if you've ever experienced like a Gen 1 like fiberglass paddle, those have that sensation of the ball comes off fast off the face, but it does feel like the velocity dies off quicker than it does when you're hitting with something with more plow through like a Saga or a Gen 2 paddle. So because of that, like overall, I think the power on the all quartz is lower compared to the Saga series. That one you just get more plow through. You're getting more like juice on your shots. The one outlier is going to be that vapor shape. So I think maybe because this one's heavier, it has less of that effect. And this is the only one I would probably place in the actual all quart category. That sensation I mentioned before of like the velocity of the ball not really traveling after it shoots off the face fast. It's the Pegasus that's like very guilty of that. And then also the Hirachi, which is like pretty light. These two I would place more in the like all court lane control category. Like you just don't really get as much on drive. Specifically the Pegasus, obviously because it does have that smaller shape. You're not really expecting much power on this, but it's just noticeably less, even with its high swing weight compared to something like the Bloom. Like you can tell that the Bloom has more power than this. And the Vapor is really just the one that stands out. It's got more power, like noticeably more than the Hirachi and the Pegasus, and it just gets more like juice behind each one of the shots. So overall, the Saga does win out on power, with the exception being the Vapor All Court. This is the only one I'm putting in the like actual All Court category. The other two I think are just noticeably lighter, and you just don't get that juice on your shots. So those are more like all court leaning control paddles. Whereas the Saga series, I put them more like all court leaning power these days. Maybe like bottom tier of power for the long handle V7. The Bloom is surprisingly like a lot less powerful compared to the other ones. Like you kind of see an expected drop from the V7 to the Flashes, but then like the Bloom to the Flash is like a much bigger jump. This one is more like, I'd say all court leaning control as well. Noticeably softer than not softer feeling, but noticeably like less power compared to the other Saga paddles, or yeah, the other Saga series. Lastly, let's talk a bit on the sweet spots. So I would say it really depends on like where you like to hit the ball. Like they both have similar construction. So they're both that Gen 1.5 paddle. So they both like series have that edge foam, but they both just have like different shapes on where you like to hit it. So let's start with the standard shapes. With the Bloom, this is a bit more of a square shape, and then the Pegasus has that bit of a flare. And even though it is a bit shorter, it does push up the bounce a bit higher. So this one is a bit more like top heavy compared to this, which has more of like a rounded sweet spot compared to this being targeted a bit higher. So personally, I like the Pegasus shape over this one, but this is more personal preference. I think the majority of players will like the Bloom shape better. Similar with the Flash versus the Vapor. The Vapor, you see, again, it has that like flatter top, and that weight being concentrated there. There is more of the sweet spot area and like balance up here compared to the flash paddles. I think the flash long handle does have a higher one as well because of that longer handle, but I think it's more apparent on like the vapor. Like the vapor does have like a really high sweet spot, but there is a sharper drop off down at the bottom areas compared to the flash paddle. So again, like the flashes have like a more like well-rounded sweet spot, but if you like to hit near the top, you would probably like the vapor shape better. And lastly is the V7. So these have that flatter top. So these are the ones actually that have that higher sweet spot and higher balance compared to the Hirachi. This one I think is a bit smaller sweet spot compared to this one, just because this one's like a bit lighter, but this one is a bit more top heavy, but at the same time it's also slower. So yeah, either way, it's up to personal preference. So I'm not really gonna give like the sweet spot like one series over the another because they're both kind of similar in their construction, and it's more of like where you like to hit the ball and like which shape you're actually going to prefer. Lastly, I guess we can go over the spin. I'll just say if you want to know what I think about the spin, you can check out what I said in the hot take on the latest episode of the All Drive No Drop podcast. And one last thing is like, which one do I prefer? At least from my personal opinion. I personally think they're both fantastic paddles. I think they both have their place in the market, and it's actually really nice that both of these companies are going for that Gen 1.5 construction, which is more durable than Gen 2, and just introducing something like new to the pickleball market without like doing thermoforming, so we don't have to worry about core crushing. We're getting these more durable paddles, and like they're innovating on this like older tech of, there's like older tech since Gen 1.5 is a bit like of an older construction process. But ultimately for me, it's going to come down to which paddle I think feels the best. And I personally like the feel of the Sagas more, just because I like that feeling with the extra dwell time. That said, I think people will still really like the all courts as well. I think they're really great paddles. And especially if you really like that plush feel, but just want a bit more juice, I think these are more reminiscent of a Gen 1. Like an actual Gen 1.5 paddle. Like they're more similar to the Prisms and the Jelly Beans because of how soft those first two layers feel. Specifically the Hirachi and the Pegasus. I think those are very similar to the Jelly Beans. And the Vapor is like the one outlier. But I personally just don't like how that fiberglass layer gets activated and like gives it less dwell time. And I don't like the feel of of this paddle on the drives. I do like the Vapor though, but if I'm talking about the series overall, I would give it to the Sagas. But again, that's just a personal preference for me, and I do think that they're both fantastic paddles. Anyways, that's it for this week's episode. I hope you liked it. And yeah, that's it, guys.
You're moving your feet way too much.